AM radio, an op-ed column, and Fox News is not enough. I want a center-right nation to fight for its soul, and its soul is represented in the arts. Its soul is represented in a world in which media is everything. AM radio is the lowest form of communication. It's tinny, it's not robust, it's not Avatar. I want Avatar. I want the right to enter the world of media to the extent and invest in media the way that the left does.
The fake media is trying to silence us, but we will not let them, because the people know the truth. The fake media tried to stop us from going to the White House, but I'm president and they're not.
You're listening to the Curt Schilling Podcast, a Breitbart.com podcast. The podcast starts now. Here's Curt with today's headlines.
Got a great show lined up today. John Carney from Breitbart. I really am excited for you guys to hear this. There's a lot of stuff going on about trade and the embargoes and the tariffs and the stuff that's happening. And I really wanted to kind of take a layman's look at what it means to you and I in our daily lives. We're going to get a chance to talk to him about that. Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch, which might be one of the most important groups around right now, considering what they're trying to do. And in response to that, I want you to listen to Fox News with Representative Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan speaking out on the Laura Ingraham angle, talking about articles of impeachment and why they're seeking articles of impeachment against Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Listen up.
Congressman Meadows, let's start with you. What are you accusing Rod Rosenstein of specifically?
Well, really, for 9 months, we've asked for documents, and that's all we want are the documents. And what we found is not only have subpoenas been ignored, but information has been hidden. The efforts have been stonewalled. And I guess for us, it's all about transparency so the American people can judge for themselves. And so, they may be able to ignore Congress, but they can't ignore the American people.
This is what Andy McCarthy wrote in National Review. He said, Rosenstein and Chris Wray, FBI director, work for Trump. They're not Obama holdovers, they're Trump appointees. If they're defying Congress, it's because the president is permitting them to do so. The president is empowered to give his subordinates a direct order to comply with congressional demands and to fire them immediately if they fail to do so. He's kind of looking down on this idea.
Yeah,
Congressman.
We've sent a letter to the president, Mark, myself, and Congressman DeSantis saying, declassify the information, get us all the information.
What is he? Have you ever spoken to him about this? Why won't he declassify these?
We sent the letter several weeks ago, but the bottom line is we have sent numerous letters to Rod Rosenstein they haven't complied with. 2 subpoenas they haven't complied with. We've caught the Department of Justice hiding information, redacting information that they should not have redacted. We know that Rod Rosenstein threatened House Committee Intel staffers, threatened them, chilling impact when they were trying to do their job, our job of doing the constitutional oversight we're supposed to do. And we all know what the Justice Department did with the dossier. Never forget, Rod Rosenstein signed the 3rd renewal, signed that, which was based on the dossier, which we know parts of it came from Bruce Orr, high-ranking official, through his wife Nellie, the whole ordeal. So we're tired of the Justice Department giving us the finger and not giving us the information we're entitled to do our constitutional duty. More importantly, the American people are sick of it. That's why we filed the resolution.
For exactly the reasons that you think. They're hiding, they're obfuscating, they're redacting, they've denied and walked away from requests for all the reasons you can think that they did. Yes, I'm absolutely sure that there's a need to cover up confidential sources, but the fact of the matter is that's not what's happening here. They're covering up criminal activity. We know, again, Rosenstein was the 3rd person to sign the FISA extension, knowing full well that he was signing it based on a phony document. There are felonies after felony after felony committed in there. That needs to come to light. And we're going to talk to Tom Fitton, who is a member of Judicial Watch, and we can talk about FOIAs at that time. Because they matter to you and I. And next, listen up, Fox News, Joel Lieberman, who's I think he's someone who is put on this earth to put people to sleep, was talking with Fox News' Tucker Carlson. Listen to him talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the gift that keeps on giving.
Well, obviously, she's got a right to her ideas, but if her ideas take hold in the Democratic Party, it's not only not the Democratic Party that I joined a long time ago in the inspiration of John F. Kennedy, progressive on social issues domestically, kind of pro-business, pro-growth in terms of economic policy, and a strong foreign policy based on American national interest and values. I mean, she calls herself a democratic socialist. To me, she's more of a socialist than a Democrat. And that's not good for the party that, though it rejected me in Connecticut in 2006, I continue to be a member of, although I'm obviously independent in who I support, including John McCain in 2008. So, you know what really worried me about this after Ocasio-Cortez beat Joe Crowley? During the campaign, she called for the abolition of ICE, the Immigration Customs Enforcement Section. It made no sense. I can come back to that. But after she won, 3 credible Democratic candidates for president in 2020 embraced the same call. And it's like the old story about Robespierre during the French Revolution. I got to get out in front of the mob. Those are my followers there, you know.
I'm wondering why there is so much of a struggle and a fight to tell the truth. She's not more socialist than Democrat. She's a socialist. That's what she is. That's who she is. She's a socialist. She's not disguising herself. She's not faking it. She's not hiding it. It's who and what she is. There you go. And then we have the gigantic revelation that CNN had access to a tape on President Trump talking with his former lawyer, Michael Cohen. And I want you to listen to the horrific information revealed on this tape. Listen up.
Talk about grasping at straws. Have you heard the juiciest part of the Trump-Cohen tape?
They don't have a They don't have a legitimate purpose.
Incontrovertible evidence of a thirsty president.
Give me a Coke, please.
Living up to his reputation for daily consumption of
12 Diet Cokes, right?
That's 144 ounces of president fuel.
You'd be surprised how many commenters tweeted, "My favorite part is when he yells, 'Get me a Coke, please.'" Others ranked it up there with Mom the Meatloaf from Wedding Crashers.
Hey, Ma! Can we get some meatloaf?
There were comparisons to JFK. My fellow Americans,
ask not what your country can do for you. Ask.
Give me a Coke, please.
But there was one thing that got the most comments, that even critics found pleasing. Wow, he said please. He said please? Must be a fake. Trump says please to the help. That's my president. He hasn't always been complimentary about his favorite beverage, tweeting, "I have never seen a thin person drinking Diet Coke," and "I'll still keep drinking that garbage." Jimmy Fallon once chronicled the president's behavior as he downed his daily dozen.
The American dream is dead. Bing, bing, bong, and dat. Hello. And God bless the United States.
Now he has a red button on his Oval Office desk to push when he wants a Coke, but when he was a candidate, he actually had to speak.
Give me a Coke, please.
As one commenter noted, things, including hush money, go better with Coke.
Things go better with Coca-Cola.
Genimos.
Give me a Coke, please.
CNN.
Things go better with Coke.
Oh, CNN, the center of hard-hitting journalism. And listen, that was nothing but funny. So the president likes Diet Coke, along with his Wendy's that I remember seeing him eat on the private jet. That was the big revelation on CNN. And then we have NBC Nightly News, which listening to it, why he's having to do it, I don't know. But Mike Pompeo was on Capitol Hill to defend President Trump's foreign policy, which is kicking the left's ass over and over and over again on a daily basis. Listen up to Pompeo.
Today, the Secretary of State taking fire from Democrats and the Republican chairman about that 2-hour private meeting between President Trump and Vladimir Putin.
It's the president's public statements that create concern amongst senators on both sides of the aisle.
The senators even doubting that the Secretary of State knows what Mr. Trump promised Putin because they met without note-takers.
Did he tell you what transpired in the 2-hour meeting?
I've had a number of conversations with President Trump about what transpired in the meeting.
Did you speak to the translator who was at that meeting?
No, I haven't. Senator, I understand the game that you're playing.
No, Mr. Secretary, with all due respect, I don't appreciate you characterizing my questions. My questions is to get to the truth. We don't know what the truth is.
Today, Pompeo firmly rejecting Putin's suggestion that Russians be allowed to interrogate former U.S. diplomats, like Mike McFaul, former U.S. ambassador to Russia, an NBC analyst.
Under no circumstances should the Russian government indict and convict former American officials when they were doing their job.
Let me make clear. The United States will defend our team in the field and the team that's been in the field when it retires.
Tonight, the Republican chairman saying the president was submissive and deferential to Putin and slamming him for calling Kim Jong-un, one of the most ruthless leaders on the planet, very talented.
I continue to kind of chuckle at the fact that senators are getting offended when they're being called out for playing games, which is exactly what they're doing. And let that be another lesson in the fact that the people we're electing are not doing the job we asked them to do. They are grandstanding. You can almost call it Elizabeth Warrening, trying to act as if they're doing something that they're not, while they're not actually doing anything. And when did presidents meeting with heads of state behind closed doors become public knowledge? I mean, the same people that are defending the FBI and the CIA for not releasing information as it pertains to crimes and cover-ups committed by our Justice Department are screaming for basically a written transcript of a meeting that they're not supposed to have access to anyway. Anyway, John Carney is going to be up in a little while, and I want you to listen to the U.S. trade policy is an incredibly tangled web. It always has been, it always will be. But I want you to listen to what President Trump has to say in talking about the trade barriers that exist and how, which, by the way, we've come to find out in the last 24 hours, he has actually done what he said he was going to do, which is to get the EU to back off and for things to begin happening, and it's positive for Americans. Listen up to him talking about the U.S. and the EU will work together.
We want to further strengthen this trade relationship to the benefit of all American and European citizens. This is why we agreed today, first of all, to work together towards zero tariffs, zero non-tariff barriers, and zero subsidies on non-auto industrial goods. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We will also work to reduce barriers and increase trade in services, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, medical products, as well as soybeans. Soybeans is a big deal. And the European Union is going to start almost immediately to buy a lot of soybeans. They're a tremendous market. Buy a lot of soybeans from our farmers in the Midwest primarily. So I thank you for that, Jean-Claude. This will open markets for farmers and workers, increase investment, and lead to greater prosperity in both the United States and the European Union. It will also make trade fairer and more reciprocal. My favorite word, reciprocal.
Reciprocal, which is how it's supposed to be. You're going to hear John Carney talk about the fact that it's when you're dealing with the European Union, it's next to impossible. Unless everybody plays on a level playing field for everything, it's next to impossible to help and appease everybody, especially in the United States, as companies and industries compete against each other for different policies, whether it be ingoing or outgoing tariffs, embargoes, and all the other stuff. So we're going to take a short break. We're going to be joined by Judicial Watch's Tom Fitton after this, and he's going to talk to us about actually the first soundbite we heard, which is one of the issues around the impeachment, articles of impeachment for Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson.
I want to actually take a couple of the references to Donald Trump from hip-hop, and then we're going to try to see if we can figure out why they like Donald Trump. Jay-Z said, I'm at the Trump International, ask for me. Raekwon said, I'm the black Trump. They are comparing themselves to what he represents, his wealth, his achievement, capitalism.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson, Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125. You're listening to the Curt Schilling Podcast. Once again, here's Curt Schilling.
One of the groups, and specifically one of the people who are inundated right now with stuff that is, I think, incredibly important and relevant to both you and I as American citizens, is the group is called Judicial Watch. And President Tom Fitton joins me. Good morning, Tom. How are you, buddy?
Hey, good to be with you, sir. Good to meet you in person finally, or at least on the phone.
Yeah, virtually. I'm obviously a huge fan of your work and what you guys do at Judicial Watch. I played a soundbite earlier, Representative Meadows and Jordan talking about the requests that they've been making over the past 18 months to our Department of Justice, and the rebuttal and the denial and the obfuscation of the rules that they've been witnessing and enduring from Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, the FBI, the DOJ. I was wondering if you could explain to me, when a private citizen or a group makes a FOIA request, what legally can the government keep from you, and what are you legally entitled to when it comes to requesting, by the way, FOIA is the Freedom of Information Act. I was wondering if you could kind of touch on that real quick.
Well, FOIA is an open records law, so the government's got to respond to you at the federal level, and states have their own sunshine laws as well, but they don't have to respond with everything they have. They can keep classified material, law enforcement material, your Social Security number. I don't want to see that, and private information like that. So there are a whole host of exemptions that the government can assert to keep records from being shown to you, and the question is, and that's the fight we get into in court all the time, is whether or not those exemptions are being rightfully employed and whether the secrecy is appropriate or not. And sometimes the courts open them up. And or in the case of these FISA records that we just received this week, or I guess late Saturday, the president had declassified the underlying material, so they really couldn't withhold it from us anymore.
To be clear, there are certain things that as a private citizen, I don't want exposed as, confidential sources and undercover sources and people's private, personal Social Security number information. I get that. But what I'm hearing from Meadows and from Jordan, and I've heard from you guys as well, is, and I believe that it's not real complicated. The information they're trying to keep from you, there's a reason they're trying to keep it. And in the case of everything happening around this FISA warrant and the multiple re-ups that they signed, and with the authority and with the knowledge that this dossier was complete BS, they're trying to hide, I believe, criminal activity. And I wonder how far they can go, because it feels to me like you're getting stonewalled, and I'm sure you have been in the past as the government tries to, as we expose more and more of it, we understand how corrupt things are in DC, and you're really kind of, for us as private citizens, one of our last vestiges of hope in being able to acquire information and find out why and how things are happening inside of our government.
Well, that's why we got to keep the pressure on, because the government holds a lot of the cards, and when we're in fighting with them in court for these records. So this is why the president needs to intervene to make the Justice Department and the FBI more transparent, especially on the illicit targeting of him and his campaign and people around him by the Obama administration, which frankly continued under the deep state into his administration. And so it's a big battle. Congress has certain powers. They're talking about impeaching Rod Rosenstein for refusing to turn over records. And, of course, the courts can also require the government turn over records. But it requires political, in the end, unless the president has people running the agencies who are committed to transparency and not to cover up, it's a difficult battle.
And that's a question I'd like to ask you. How much and what actually can our president do to intercede in here? Can he make something happen that you can't? Can he change the rules? Can he fix it so the groups you're requesting this information from are legally bound to give you things that they don't want to give you?
Yes, he can. He can do anything he needs to do to get the records released.
Okay. All right. So basically,
the only reason
really
we would not declassify the information, especially in this Russiagate stuff, scandal, and we can get the records.
I got to believe that terrifies the Comeys and the Clintons and the McCabe's and the Obamas and the Rices and the Holders. That's got to terrify people like that. And I would wonder, let me ask you offhand, why wouldn't the president just step in right now and force that to happen?
Oh, I suspect he's being told he can't do it because of the interference with Justice Department, and they're playing the national security card with the president. And of course, the Mueller operation is keeping this a lot of this information secret as well. So he doesn't want to be seen as interfering with that. But I still think he should do it, and we've been encouraging the White House to do that.
And I agree. And let me ask you kind of a random off the wall question. Is there any fear in your mind or in your heart or in your head that if you were to get everything, I guess that what I'm asking is, do you think that there's something there that would be too much for the American people, like overwhelming? Like, if you were to get, and I'm using extreme, but if we were to get, information that would find out that our Justice Department is corrupt from top to bottom and that they've been committing crimes for 30 years and whatever. Do you ever worry about getting stuff that would that would be a tipping point? And because it feels to me like if we knew what we don't know, or if we knew half of what we don't know when it comes to companies and organizations like that, we would be, I think there's a lot of people who wouldn't be able to accept that truth.
Yeah, I think that this is about covering up corruption. The American people can handle, frankly, wouldn't be surprised probably by a lot of the details of the corruption when it comes out. But it's the government bureaucracies and the politicians that we're running them that don't want to be held to account there, and they're more afraid than the American people.
I wholeheartedly agree. I got to tell you, I'm very open fan of what you guys are doing, because it feels to me like every time you guys head in a direction and make a request, it's done so, and I'm sure it is, it's done so with a lot of your own intelligence and recognition of where the holes and where the pitfalls lie, and where they're trying to move and shake and make sure you don't find out what you're trying to get knowledge for the American people. And I guess I would close by asking you this. I know this is an open-ended question, but where is this going to end? In my mind, if you could get to the finish line tomorrow from a documentation perspective, what would you have in front of you to look at?
Well, one of the big things is the other part of this FISA warrant where the Clinton DNC dossier was used to target Trump. There's other material that's been withheld that's probably just as bad as the dossier, and we'd like to see that. That's where
I'm at. I really believe that we need to, through you guys, we need to find out and see the other half of this stuff, because I don't have any reservations about the fact that something really, really bad happened, and it happened with a group of people who tried to rig a presidential election and turned around and accused the actual winner of the crime. And these documents, as you've shown us and gotten exposure to these documents, the stunning lack of legal action by our justice system terrifies me. And I'm also, I guess, one last thing. It feels to me like we've learned in the last 6 to 8 months that if the government chooses to destroy you as a private citizen, you don't actually have to do a whole lot wrong for them to do that, because they can do things that will never be exposed to the public. And that to me feels like corruption of power in ways that only Russia or China or Korea can do.
Well, I mean, there are a lot more protections here. The fact is we have Judicial Watch, and that wouldn't be allowed in Russia, China,
right,
Korea, or frankly, England or France in any respect. So we have a lot more protections here. So it's not nearly that bad, but it can be pretty darn bad in the sense if you're covered, if you're the target of a federal investigation. It's a train that's pretty difficult to stop for any common citizen, that's for sure.
Here's my problem. General Michael Flynn, who I don't believe has done anything wrong, his life spent in service of this nation was destroyed in pretty much 48 hours. And as I think we've come to learn over the last couple of months, not all is as it seems to be with General Flynn and what the left has said he has done. And I think maybe someday we're going to find out he didn't do anything wrong, but that's, I think, past the point. This guy's life and his legacy have been ruined by people that we're learning now are corrupt.
Yeah, I think you're right about General Flynn, and it shows you you don't even need to be a common guy. You can be someone in a senior position in the White House and still be run over by abusive federal government bureaucrats. But, this is why we got to use the tools available to us as American citizens, and Judicial Watch does this as a group, and Congress needs to exercise its prerogatives to make sure that abuses like that are either exposed or don't occur anymore.
Hey, listen, I know you're busy, but I sincerely appreciate you taking time out to join me this morning. Love to have you back, and keep doing what you're doing.
Hey, appreciate the time. Thanks for covering us.
All right, Tom, take care.
Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlow.
Why did we see some of the Republican kissing of Mark Zuckerberg that was taking place?
I called it kissing the ring, because I felt like every single person practically had to kiss the ring of this guy, who wants to do nothing except get all those people out of office. So, bizarre behavior from the Republicans.
Breitbart News Daily, weekdays at 6 a.m. Eastern on Sirius XM Patriot 125. We want to hear from you. Tweet the show at Garrick38. Once again, here's Curt Schilling.
Hey, welcome back, guys. Joining me now is Breitbart's Economics and Finance editor, John Carney. Good morning, John. How are you, buddy?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to bare my soul here for a minute. I have taken a late approach in life to tariffs and embargoes and all the things that go with it, working my butt off to understand how it all kind of works. And the one thing I've come to realize is that there is no one-size-fits-all for international trade. Unless everybody's going to play on a level playing field and start with zero as far as penalties or incentives, then it's going to change. And I say that as it relates to the United States, because where the southern agricultural industries, relies on massive amounts of exports. Some of the northern and eastern or western industries rely on massive amounts of imports. I was wondering if you could explain to kind of the layman how big of a thing this is. This is so complicated and so big that the minute you start to try and push and tweak a lever here, you can't do anything independent of everything else.
That's absolutely true. It's immensely complicated, partly for the very reasons you just described, which is that different parts of the U.S. economy have had very different interests for a long time when it comes to trade. So you have to think about that. And then you're dealing with international players, and all the countries of the world are always looking for an edge for themselves. And they know that if they can get away with cheating here or there on the edge, that over 10 or 20 years, they can massively enrich themselves. So
right.
It's a little bit like where you have, to use a sports analogy, where if you had, a basketball player, a football player, and a baseball player on your team, yet you're trying to get them to all run in the same direction, but one guy wants to dunk the ball and the other guy wants to, kick it through the uprights. There's a lot of complexities here, and it's one of the reasons why the simple answers you hear from people who just say, "Oh, well, let's just have free trade."
Right.
Don't make much sense. A simple answer. Somebody gives you a very, very simple answer when it comes to trade. They're not really understanding what's going on.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask you as I looked through the early, kind of the birthing pains of the United States of America when we were the kind of the 13 colonies, and back then, Congress could negotiate trade deals independent of the White House, and each of these states had its own policies with Britain and with France and with the West Indies. And so when the government was trying to negotiate with other countries, they were doing so 13 different ways, and everybody had and protectionism was a bit different back then than it is now. I see today's government talking about protectionism or the Democrats talking about protectionism as almost an evil thing when, if you're not going to be looking out for your own country and your own manufacturers and your own economy, who are you looking out for? And not that we're out there doing it alone. Everybody we trade with is looking to protect their consumers and their creators, which I understand. But mention and talk about, so I guess one of the things I want to talk about is the auto industry. You heard everybody talk about Elon Musk is talking about this gigantic move to China and why he would do that. And one of the things that jumps in here is subsidies, government subsidies, and how they incentivize companies to a lot of the things that like the carrier deal around the election that President Trump was incentivizing businesses, and I mean, it's very simplistic in the sense that basically creates jobs for American citizens.
Look, part of the thing is you're not dealing with, people talk about a level playing field, and I think it's kind of, in some ways, a fantasy land when they talk about this. Yep. Because you have, we see it within the United States, frankly. We have competitive bidding going around with states and cities all around the country trying to get Amazon to build their second headquarters there. Mm-hmm. That goes on all the time with businesses all over the world. So you have China, which sets up a lot of rules to try to make everybody manufacture things in China in all sorts of ways. Then you have Europe, which again, the entire concept of the EU is that they're going to have free trade within the EU and penalize people who aren't in it, right? So that's why the UK is having all its Brexit difficulties. Because
and that's a great. I'm sorry, John. That's a great point. One of the fallacies of the EU is, and I think it's imperative that people understand this. The EU, as far as trade, tariffs, and embargoes go, was never ever a realistic option. Because you're talking about multiple countries and tens of millions of people in very different, very distinct. They've become countries, they become nations very different than other countries and nations. They do things differently at home, and you've got all these countries that are trying to abide by the same trade embargo or same trade tariffs, and it just doesn't work that way. And as it relates to the United States, the one thing I wanted to say is if you and I vote for somebody in our district or our state, we're voting for them because they're telling us that they're going to do X, Y, and Z for our business. Well, you've got hundreds of those people in Washington, and none of them are doing things that are that run together. A lot of them are going against each other. So you've got political desires and constituent requests that are confrontational in D.C., and which is another reason why this thing is so big and so complicated.
I think that's right. If you look at all the problems that just the EU has as a free trade zone, the U.S. had a unique advantage in that we got to build a country from scratch as a free trade zone. So that we are actually more aligned than any. We are the biggest free trade zone in the entire world. It's called the United States. There's not a tax when I buy something from New Jersey, that's made in New Jersey in New York City.
Right.
There's not. You can. We use computers that are phones designed in California, and we don't pay a tax, either a tariff or a tax. And so there is so we have a massive free trade zone. So one of the things that's one of the reasons we have a very powerful, the world's greatest economy. And even within our free trade zone, as you say, congressmen look out for their constituencies, and it was set up that way. So of course the European countries, which lack what we have, which is a common language and a common culture, are going to have a much rougher time of this than So right now, you have people in Spain who would like to buy American-made cars, but they can't because the German car makers want to make sure there's a tariff around Europe's cars so that to benefit the German car makers. That doesn't help anybody in Spain, but it helps the Germans.
That speaks to the very gut of the problems with the EU. It was very much one of the reasons I felt like one of the opponents of Brexit were trying to use the complicated trade system as a reason why they couldn't leave the EU, as if hey, we're bound by all these nightmarish trade agreements. And the people in the UK are saying, well, basically, let's just get out of it and have our own. While that works for the British manufacturer, that doesn't work for the EU as a whole. And I kept saying, there's a small table of people in Belgium trying to make trade policy for the entire continent, and that just doesn't work, and it's not going to fly. And now, but I was wondering if you could talk about. As I learn about the history of this country, there's some fascinating history to this entire thing as it's developed over our lifetime. But now, one of the ways that you simplified, I guess, in a sense, was allowing the president to negotiate trade. Because now, instead of 50 different people negotiating 50 different interests or thousands of different interests, you have one guy who's looking at the picture as a whole. And there's always a push-pull. There's going to be some downside to some people and upside to others. But overall, the American taxpaying citizen will benefit when you have one person focused on negotiating one policy for everybody.
That's right. So one of the things Congress did as we moved away, so in the late 19th century in particular, and the early 20th century, the original ideas behind American protectionism, which was, that we need to build up our economy and have our own manufacturing base. We had our own manufacturing base. We're becoming rapidly a very wealthy country, but you had all these special interests crop up that weren't seeking protection that was going to benefit America as a whole, but was really just redistributing wealth to giant monopolists. So to get away from that system, Congress decided after World War II, really, to delegate a lot more authority to the president on the hopes that he would create better and freer trade agreements. And also, frankly, it was partly the Cold War. We wanted our allies. We wanted Western Europe. We wanted Japan to be strong. Even later on, we wanted China to be strong countries so that to diminish the influence of the Soviet Union in the world and to show the world that capitalism was the way to prosperity. So the U.S. was, in a lot of ways, taking one for the team. We were willing to tolerate their tariffs, their trade barriers, even when it hurt us, because we thought a more prosperous, richer world will be better and help us defeat communism. It did, frankly. I mean, communism collapsed because its economy could no longer be sustained. But it's been decades since communism collapsed. The Cold War trade policies that we adopted don't make sense anymore. And frankly, that's what we're seeing right now is working out the new world of trade. What happens? I mean, it shouldn't have taken this long, but it has. But what happens when America is no longer trying to defeat the Soviet Union and no longer needs to necessarily be taking one for the team when we're dealing with, Europe, for instance, right? Europe doesn't need to be propped up by the U.S. anymore.
It harkens back to the day when our economy kind of took its own place in the world was during the Revolutionary War, when we stopped being able to import and export British goods, and people don't stop wanting things just because there's a conflict. And to provide those things for American people, you had to produce them at home. And watching that grow out of the Revolutionary War and the post-war period, and watching kind of, like I said, it's fascinating to look at the beginnings of our trade policy and understand how difficult it was with 13 states, much less 50. But now you have, and I wanted to finish up by basically, can you give people a little bit of an insight, a little bit of a look into President Trump's approach to this? Because I argue that being from the private sector gives him an enormously different approach and look to this than somebody like Barack Obama, who never ever worked or manufactured or created a job.
Donald Trump realizes that sort of words only go so far. That if you want people to change what they are doing, if you feel like you're being taken advantage of in, say, a business relationship, you have to be willing to walk away from the table. That if you feel like you got a raw deal from somebody, but you're not willing to say, look, I'm going to get up and walk away, and we're not going to deal with each other anymore.
Right.
You're never going to get a better deal. I used to be a corporate lawyer. I saw this in negotiations between some of the biggest companies in the entire world. Guys who are grown-ups in suits, leading companies with tens of thousands of people, screaming at each other from across the table, sometimes storming out of a room. Why did they have to do this? Because they realized that you have to display, you have to convince other people that you are serious about being willing to walk away. And so that is what a lot of this trade stuff that we're seeing about NAFTA, about tariffs with the EU, it's convincing them that we are willing to walk away. That if you just say, oh, come on, guys, please, get better, it's not going to happen. You have to present a credible threat of actually being willing to walk away, or it won't happen.
Hey, John, listen, always a pleasure, man. I really appreciate this.
Thanks for having me again.
Winners and losers today, and I'm going in a different route today with my loser. Fox News is my loser today, and I don't know if you guys heard about this incident, but apparently CNN correspondent to the White House, our version of Charlie Spearing with, I guess, prettier legs, Caitlin Collins, was doing an event, and you've seen the lack of respect that they show the White House, Sarah Sanders and President Trump anyway. But apparently she was shouting questions and asked to simmer down. She kept shouting the questions, and she kept interrupting about asking President Trump and she was asking him about questions about the Putin meeting and all this other stuff. But the fact of the matter was she was asking it in a way that was not appropriate. And she knew what she was doing. So anyway, they called her in. Apparently the press corps called her, or Sarah Huckabee Sanders called her in, and a gentleman that runs the White House media room basically told her that, hey, listen, anybody from CNN is welcome to come in, but you're not to the next event. She basically said, that's okay, I wasn't going anyway. Well, now there's some sort of uproar about freedom of the press. And the fact of the matter was, has nothing to do with freedom of the press. She was denied access because she was being rude and she was being bitchy. I don't understand why Bill Shine and Sarah Sanders would suffer for that. But the fact that there's protocol, right? I mean, don't they sit there and talk about the fact that everybody needs to be more professional in the White House, and they're the ones like Jim Acosta acting like you. Anyway, Fox News came out and said we're fully and stands firmly with CNN. Stands firmly with what? Being rude and obnoxious? Anyway, that just, I found that to be, and you're going to see it, by the way, guys. You're going to see this as the Murdoch sons become more and more influential at Fox. Fox is going to turn harder and harder to the left. Anyway, that's my loser today. And I was working to find a winner, but I've watched this gentleman for, I don't know, a couple years take a beating, and he has not changed who he is. If you guys are following any of the stuff coming out of Hollywood around the pedophilia and the child trafficking and all the other stuff, James Woods has been a lone voice. It almost feels like floating on the ocean in a raft as he tries to survive. He basically has admitted that his career's over, which is why he's doing what he's doing. But the fact of the matter is, he is the lone guy out there. To him, I know it's got to be tough because as he works day in and day out to have a voice, Hollywood, and what we're finding out is the Sarah Silvermans of the world and the Patton Oswalt. They're just gross people. And apparently, all these people that were highly offended that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was kind of parodied in an interview are all trying to go nuts about the fact that James Gunn was fired for being basically a lover of child porn and all the other stuff that goes with that. And that's who they are. So anyway, thanks again. Great day today. Tom Fitton and John Carney. This was a lot of fun. Look forward to tomorrow. Sean Spicer, former White House press secretary, will join me, and we'll have a lot of fun with that, I promise you. Have a great day, guys.
Rebecca Mansour.
The real thing that the left is angry about is they're like, how could you allow these Russian memes? Somebody saw a meme and then they decided they had to vote for Trump. Or it must have been fake news. And by fake news, they mean conservative websites. Come on. But this is what the left thinks. Fake news. And by fake news, what they mean is shut down Breitbart.
Breitbart News Tonight. Weeknights starting at 9 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.